We are going to be making s'mores bars this week. I'm so glad that you've joined me. First thing we're going to do is go ahead and preheat our oven to 350 degrees. So we're going to go ahead and get that started. And then we're going to start with making our graham cracker crust. So we are going to go ahead and take a full sleeve of graham crackers. And in the instructions that I sent you beforehand, I'm going to be using the plastic bag and mallet way of making these into crumbs. But if you have a food processor and you prefer to use that, you may go ahead and do so. But if you're like me and you're just going to go the low-tech way, you're going to take one full sleeve of graham crackers and pop these in the bag. And then a half a sleeve. Alright, so this has 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. 4.5, I guess. So 4.5 more graham crackers. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And 1/2. All right. Go ahead and put that back in there. All right, so I'm going to squeeze out a bit of the air here to kind of get these so they're kind of spread out of the bag. And I'm going to go ahead and seal it. And then I have a meat tenderizing mallet. So I'm going to use the flat side. The other side has like some sharp edges, not super sharp, but sharp enough that they will cut the bag, and we don't want to do that. So we're just going to take that flat side and just kind of use it gently to make this into crumbs. Again, you don't need a whole lot of force with this. You don't want to harm your countertop. Spin this around. Get my other side. So it's still got some fairly large chunky pieces, so I'm going to focus on those. Go ahead and flip this over. Ooh, that side is looking pretty good. All right, I am pretty happy with that consistency. We're going to call that good enough. That looks pretty crummy to me. And I'm going to go ahead and put my mallet back in the drawer where it lives. All right, so we are ready to melt the butter that's going to get mixed with this graham cracker. This calls for a 2/3 cup of butter. So I have my sticks of butter. 1/3 cup is, goodness, right there, 5 and a little over, like 1/3 of that. So 2/3 cup is going to be 10 and then 2. So this is 8 plus 1, 2, and then about 2/3 into there. And actually you can see this isn't wrapped very well, so I'm going to go ahead and go almost to that 1/3. There we go. All right. Now in my instructions I indicated that you could use a cutting board. I happen to have a solid surface here, and I'm just going to cut on my wax paper. But if you pulled out a cutting board and you want to cut with your cutting board, that would be great. I'm just cutting this into smaller chunks just so it'll melt faster when we pop it into the microwave. All right, so we're just gonna slice that. No particular number or count or anything like that. Just again, gonna help it melt a little bit more evenly. I'm gonna set that to the side because we are gonna use our knife again. I'm going to get my microwave cover. So we're going to go ahead and pop this into the microwave and heat it up for about 30 to 40 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and do 40 to make sure that that gets good and melted for us. While that is melting, I'm going to go ahead and double check my next set of directions. And actually, while we're waiting here, the reason I covered it, butter when it's melting in a microwave will start to pop and spatter. It'll make a huge mess in your microwave. So you always want to make sure that it's covered. If you don't have one of those things that I have, you can just use a nice oversized piece of paper towel and put that over your bowl, whatever works. But again, you don't want to put it in there uncovered or you will have a mess on your hand. All right, so while that is melting, we are going to go ahead and get our sugar handy because we're going to be mixing that in with the graham crackers and the butter once we see this. All right. Okay, so that is, you'll see 40 seconds. It is mostly melted. This is going to be good to go for what we're needing it for. So we're going to take our graham cracker crumbs and pop these in our medium mixing bowl. Make sure I get all those crumbs out of there. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and measure our sugar. And this recipe calls for 1/3 cup of granulated sugar to mix in with the crumbs. So I happen to have one of those measuring cups that you can use it for a number of different things, or if you have a 1/3 cup, that'll work too. Pour my granulated sugar up to the 1/3 line. Shake that, make sure that's where I want it. That looks good to me. Go ahead and get that mixed in. And we're going to need this again, so we're going to leave that handy. And then we're going to go ahead and pour our, actually, you know what? Before I pour that in, let's go ahead and give this a little whirl. Combine the sugar with the graham cracker a bit, and then we'll go ahead and add our butter in. And I'm going to use this and make sure I get all that yummy butter out of there. This recipe actually calls for a lot of butter. I was kind of surprised when I was pulling everything out how much we need for this. Must mean it's going to taste extra good. So we're going to go ahead and incorporate that melted butter in with our crumbs and our sugar. Oh, that smells so good. So I'm just making sure that the graham cracker is getting, you know, wet with that butter and that sugar, and they're getting combined well there. Oops. pretty happy with that. It seems well combined. And that was my oven chiming saying that it is preheated, so that is perfect timing. So we're gonna go ahead and grease our pan. I gave you two options in your instructions. If you have cooking spray like Pam handy, you may use that. I'm gonna go ahead though and use our other option, which is to take a little piece of saran wrap. You can also take a small sandwich baggie, that would work fine too. And a little bit of margarine. So I'm gonna pop my fingers protected in the saran wrap, although they are clean. I did wash my hands right before we started this. And just dip my fingers into that margarine to get enough on my fingers so that I can grease this pan. So again, my fingers are protected from the butter, or margarine rather, with this saran wrap. And that wasn't quite enough, so I'm gonna go back in and just do one more pass. I wanna make sure that I'm getting my sides as well as the bottom here, because this is gonna be a super rich and gooey creation. Alrighty. Okay, so now we're ready to go ahead and put our crumbs in the pan. Just using my fork to kind of scrape this all out. You know, and I really like to bake just using really, you know, you don't need a lot of complicated things. Good old sturdy kitchen fork will take you a long way in the baking world. So don't be intimidated. Don't think you need fancy stand mixers and things like that. Really, a bowl and a fork. So we're going to go ahead and press this firmly using our fork into the bottom of this baking dish. Make sure that we're getting good coverage all along the bottom of that baking dish. That smells really good. I can't wait to have this. The instructions say you should let it cool a little bit before you eat this dessert. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to wait, though. We will see. All right, so that feels pretty firm there. I've gotten the crumbs pretty evenly from side to side. And I think I'm happy with that. All right, so we're done with this fork for right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop that into my sink. And then this can go ahead into the oven because it's gotta bake while we start to make our next layer. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop that in there. If my memory serves me correctly, 7 minutes, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and set my timer for 7 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and keep progressing in our recipe for the next layer. All right, so back to melting some more butter, I believe. Yep, so 1 cup of butter this time. And this is easy because each stick is a half a cup of butter, so we just need the 2 sticks in there. We're going to use that same trick again. Now this recipe said softened butter. I did not pull my butter out ahead of time to soften it. I wasn't expecting you all necessarily to do so either. So we'll use the microwave trick. So I'm just kind of slicing that again so it'll melt pretty evenly for us. And I had a little bit less butter the first time around, and that 40 seconds did a pretty good job. So I think we're gonna go with that again. again, this recipe is calling for a lot of butter, which means it's going to be a lot of delicious. All right, now we are done with our knife as well, so we can go ahead and toss that in our sink. Pop that in there. Again, make sure it is covered either with any kind of plastic lid that you might have that's intended for microwaves. This one has holes in it so it will vent properly but not splatter butter all over my microwave. Or a paper towel, as long as you cover it firmly so that it doesn't fall out, will be great. All right, so let's go ahead and wash our hands. They got a little greasy from that butter. Alrighty. Okay, so we are going to be doing, once that comes out, we're going to be doing 3/4 cup of granulated sugar. So we can go ahead and measure that. That'll toss perfect. I'm pretty happy with that. It's melted in some places, but not completely. So again, if you had softened it, it really wouldn't be this loose, but I didn't soften it ahead of time, and it's okay. This cheat is fine. All right. So we have our 3/4 cup of granulated sugar. Rest this on because we are going to need that spoon for later. And then 3/4 cup of brown sugar as well. Okay, wow. I have a spoon in here from the last time I was baking. Is about halfway done, so I think actually the timing on this is going to work out great because once we pull it out, we're supposed to let it cool just a little bit. So again, I think our timing is going to be good. All right, I think I need just a tiny bit more of this brown sugar to get it up to that 3/4. Yep, there we go. All right, so let's go ahead and pop that in there, and then we're going to add butter. Get our mix and scraper out again. And if you don't have like a spatula spoon like I have here and you're trying to scrape butter out, a regular spoon will work just fine. Again, don't need fancy stuff to have success baking some really yummy things in the kitchen. So we are creaming together this butter and the 2 kinds of sugar. Just making sure that everything's incorporated well together. Okay, that's pretty well incorporated to me. I'm going to go ahead and pop this butter back in the refrigerator. That was that one tiny little bit. We used almost 4 sticks of butter in this recipe. Woo! It's a lot of butter. All right, so we can go ahead and add our 2 eggs. So I'm going to crack them on the side of the bowl, open them carefully so that we don't end up with any shells in there. I learned something new. I've been baking for a long time, but I learned something new recently. If you do end up with a piece of shell in your, if a piece of shell had broken off, shell attracts shell. So you could kind of help pull it out with the shell. It'll work kind of like a magnet. I'm gonna go ahead and wash my hands because I got a little bit of egg on them. And you probably just heard my chime go for our crust. So it's got just a few seconds left. So this is great timing. We are done with that too. So let's get that out of our way. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull out my oven mitt. Tap my margarine back in the fridge. All right. So let's turn the timer off. We're keeping the oven on because we have 2 more baking cycles left with this recipe. Let's go ahead and pull that out. Oh my goodness, that smells good. All right. So that's just going to hang out while we continue to finish making this next layer of our recipe. So I've cracked my 2 eggs. We're going to go ahead and get those mixed in. And then we're going to add our vanilla into this party too. Alrighty, so 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Call for us to mix this, beat this until it's kind of light and fluffy. So if you normally use a stand mixer and that's what you're using this evening, that is great. I have one. It belonged with my grandmother. It's passed down to me. It's just heavy and cumbersome, so I really only pull it out when a recipe absolutely calls for it. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how that looks. There's like 1 chunk of brown sugar that's still hanging out in there, but I think that's okay. All right, so I'm gonna set the fork aside there for a second. And now I think we're ready to add our flour. All right, so it's 2 1/4 cup of flour. Should cut the excess. And so 1. 2, and just 1/4 cup. Wow, that is on the money there. Okay, and to that we are going to add our salt and our baking soda. I grabbed baking powder. So let's not make that mistake because that would bring a different consistency to things. Ah, there it is. Hiding. Alright, so make sure you're using baking soda and not baking powder. It's 1 teaspoon. So I'm going to kind of shake that out on the top, and then 1 teaspoon of salt. Excellent. So now we can go ahead and take our fork back again and get this nice and combined. So first I'm kind of mixing that baking soda and salt in with the flour, and then I'm going to start incorporating those wet ingredients. In hindsight, a little bit larger bowl probably would have been helpful, but we have committed to this size, so we'll just keep going with it. Nice and mixed in with that. Okay. Alright, so now we're ready to add in some chocolate chips and some of the mini marshmallows that we have. So for chocolate chips, it is 1 cup. It's a little bit of a generous pour, but I don't think you can have too much chocolate. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start incorporating these before we add in the mini marshmallows. Scissors for these marshmallows. I hope you guys didn't have any trouble finding your ingredients. Tis the season of s'mores, so marshmallows and chocolate bars were a little hard to find in places. Alright, so 1, 2, and then the rest is going to go on later, so we're just going to pop those aside. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and mix these marshmallows in. So anyway, it took a couple of trips to a couple different stores to make sure I had all the ingredients for this recipe. So again, I hope you either already had everything on hand or you found it with no problem at all. Okay. All right, that looks good. All right, so now what we need to do is we need to carefully spread this mixture on top of that crust. I'm just trying to get all this good dough off this fork. Do not like to waste good dough. All right, let's get the eggs out of my way. Once this gets in the oven, we're going to do a little cleanup so it'll make it easy at the end. Clean as you go, right? All right, now that was still a little warm. I did touch it with my fingers. You will not want to do that at home, friends. All right, so I'm going to kind of drop spoonful by spoonful. And then we'll go back and connect the dots, so to speak. Don't want to disturb the crust too much while we're getting this next layer on. Ooh, that's a nice chippy spoonful there. actually had a bonfire a couple weeks ago and had s'mores outside, and they were so good. I just love s'mores. As you can see, I still have a lot in there, so I'm going to go ahead and just keep squeezing this in here. Wow, this is going to be a really rich dessert. I have actually not made this recipe before, so this is a trial for all of us, unless you happen to have found this before our baking time. Alright, let's go ahead and fill in the holes and the sides. So I'm kind of, just making sure things are covered completely. See, I've got some gaps there, so that's what I'm going to focus on next. Leave no crust uncovered. Have any glaring holes here where this last little bit should go. All right, I think that looks pretty well covered with that cookie dough. Wow, that is gonna be something. All right, so I'm gonna grab my mitt again. Grab the side and go ahead and get this back in our oven. All right, I think it was 17 minutes this time. Let's find, whoops, 18 minutes. All right, so while that is cooking, let's go ahead, friends, and do a little tidying up here in our kitchen. And get anything that can be loaded into our dishwasher, loaded into our dishwasher. Nice glass bowl. Now I know this is a very unusual summer, friends, and I can't do what we normally might be liking to do in the summer, but I hope you guys are having some fun, hopefully baking. You may have noticed in your summer work packet online that there is a Just for Fun section. And those of you who may have participated in virtual baking this past spring, our elective, we compiled a cookbook. So it includes all the recipes and the videos, how-to videos of the recipes that we made this spring. We ended up doing 6 of them. And then also members of the virtual baking elective suggested recipes, some that they had made before, some that they found in family cookbooks and things like that, which I thought that was really cool. And so that was super exciting to get all those recipes. So hopefully you all have been taking advantage and have been making some of those treats to share with your family. All right, I think that's all I'm going to get on the bottom there. Still have some stuff from dinner in the sink here as well. lamb chops on the grill for dinner, which was delicious. One of my favorite meals. So that was a nice treat. So again, I hope you guys have been having a great summer and have been making some of those treats that we have that we can make together, or that we made together, and now you can make at home just following step by step. You can go ahead and